We start iteration number 2, and the goal of this iteration is to set up the project. Here is our solution implementation and iteration number 1, where we planned the today's code project. We completed iteration number 1 already, and now we are here in iteration 2, setting up the project using Xcode. Again, as we mentioned before, there are 3 steps to the app development process. It's an iterative process. In each iteration, we repeat all those 3 steps again. So in iteration number 2, we repeat step number 1, problem formulation. Step number 2, solution formulation. Step number 3, solution implementation. In the problem formulation, we define the scope and the testing scenarios. So in the scope of this app, we need to set up a project in Xcode and set up what we call source control. So this is like the first one is, you probably know it, you don't know Xcode, so this is the development environment. We call it integrated development environment for iOS. Actually, it's not just for iOS, it's for all Apple products. So even if you want to develop for the Mac or OS, you will use the Xcode environment as well. And set up source code, this is something I'm telling you about that we need to set up a way to control the different versions of our app. Since we are going through iterations, it is likely you're not going to finish this in one setting. Sometimes you are collaborating for all the 5 modules. You're collaborating with me or someone else if you're taking the class. In the final project, you are collaborating with a team if you go that route. So set up the source control of the project and perhaps add developer information, as we will see. In the testing scenario, we don't really have an app yet, but we could have a blank app. We will have an empty app after we set up the project, but we should have a project folder for our app. In the solution formulation, we're not really developing the app, we are in setup. So you have the model, you have the view, you have the controller. There isn't really anything in the controller, nothing to do for the controller. For the view, perhaps set up the splash screen with developer information. You'll see that in a moment. And in the model, we will need data about the developer. And what do you want to display on the app? Sometimes when you open an app, you'll see like credit section. So I will just say copyright information, my name, and the date is 2017. You may want to add other information, so that becomes the data that you need for this iteration. Solution implementation, as we mentioned before, these are the steps we need to follow. Since we're no longer doing planning, that's what we're actually going to do. So create a new project, a new iOS project on Xcode using one of the templates. Set up source control locally and on GitHub server, and we'll see and learn what that is. And then finally set up the splash screen with developer information. Right, so these are the 3 steps that we're going to follow. So let's go ahead and follow those steps. First, open Xcode. If you have it on your computer, it looks like the design page with the hammer. That's Xcode. If you do not have it, open the App Store, the App Store app on your Mac, and download Xcode. I already clicked open, so here is my Xcode. project, and if you have any apps that you opened before, it will show up here in this list. And you have three options: playground, new Xcode project, or an existing project. So we're gonna create a new Xcode project. So click on new Xcode project, and the Xcode project opens up this window, which is the Xcode development environment, and give you those templates for new project. And you see different tabs on the platforms that are available. We are using the iOS platform. There are templates for developing applications, framework and framework and library. We are developing application. There are 7 templates, and we will be using a single view application template. This is a template that gives you a fully functional app with one screen that does nothing. And this is the most convenient template for our level, and we will be using it as the starting point for all the projects in this course, all the 5 modules. So we choose single view application template. Then it goes to ask you some information about your project, the product name. Use your last name followed by the name of the project. The reason you use your last name, so when you submit it to me, it's easy for me to grade. So if you are not if you're watching the video and you're not taking the class, just use any name. If you're using an organization or working in a company, they usually have some regulations on what you want to name your projects. The organization name and the organization identifier. The identifier is a unique identifier for the app on the App Store. If you are putting the app on the App Store, the identifier is very specific to what you specified when you created your Apple developer account. So it has to match exactly what you have on your Apple developer account. If you are not intending to put this app on the store, then the identifier can be anything. One of the ways to make sure those are unique is to reverse the URL of your organization. So I reverse the URL of my department and my name in here. The language, there are 2 options. We are using the Swift programming language. On the devices, we're using the iPhone device, and uncheck any of these options. We are not using any of these 3 options. And then next. Then next it will tell you where you want to save the application. So choose a location on your folder. So this is a folder that I have everything related to this course. And one note to say about this: do not save to network drive or to external drive. The Xcode compiling and debugging process that sometimes does not work well if the source is on a network drive. So save it locally, and when you're done working, you can then move it to a network drive. There is a source control option, so choose that source control option, which says create a Git repository on my Mac. So this will create a local repository to manage the versions of your app. And then say create. So Xcode will create a project with the information that you provided and present to you the Xcode development environment with your project. The Xcode development environment has a menu, which is not showing on my screen here, but it is 3 areas. On the left side, the gray area, this is called the project navigation area. This is the area to allow you to navigate everything about the project. And there are several navigators here. There's the project navigator, which is the default one: symbol, find, issue, test, and debug, the breakpoint navigator, and the report navigator. On the right side, the opposite right side, there is the utility area. And the utility area is split vertically into two parts. The top upper part is made out of several inspectors that change based on the selection you made in the project navigator. So we selected here the project configuration, and we have a file inspector and help inspector. The lower area is the same, and it has some libraries. So it has the template library, the code library, the object library for the user interface object, and the media library. We are going to use primarily the object library in here, but you can also use the other ones. In the middle, this is the editor. This is where you can make changes to all the different project files using the libraries and the utilities provided by the iOS development environment. There are also some utilities here to hide and show the different areas. There is another window, which is our output area in the bottom here. You can hide and display those. There is the scheme, which represents the type of device you want to run the app. If you connect your phone to your computer, you will see your device on the top. Otherwise, Xcode provides with simulators for many different applications. We're going to use the iPhone 6s as our default simulator. You can change the scheme, which is our applications, and have more than one scheme for your project. And this is the you can close or minimize. You have a status bar that gives you information about the different elements of your code, of the status of the progress of your project. The editing area here has your configuration. So all the settings we set up in the template are here. The deployment target represent the minimum version that need to exist on the device, the minimum iOS version that need to exist on the device to run your app, and you can change that from here. The device, the interface, and we will talk more about that. These are the files. Like, notice the template, the single view application template created a project folder. Inside the project folder, there is a file folder and a configuration file. And inside the file folder, there is two files that end with a Swift and two files that end with storyboard. And then we have an asset folder and an info.plist, which contains the configuration of your project. The storyboard is the Xcode way of representing the screens on your app. So there is a launch screen and a main screen. And if you look at the configuration, it says main interface, and you have a choice to point to the storyboard that represent the main interface. So we'll say main storyboard is the main interface. This is very important. This tells the iOS where to go for the very first screen of your app. Apps are what's known as event-driven programming, meaning that all the actions in the app are driven by events. So the very first event is the loading of the app, and the iOS needs to know where to go to trigger the implementation or the development that you have made on your app. So here we say go to the main storyboard, and you will see later when we go there how we can point to the first screen and the first controller, and then everything is in your hand. From there you can manage the navigation if you're going to be using more than one screen. Likewise, there's an option for launch screen and an option here to set up icons for your app. The launch screen points to the second storyboard, which is our launch screen storyboard. There are several other configurations that you can browse, and you will learn about as we go through. This is a little bit advanced as for our level as beginners. We're going to focus more on the simple general configurations as well and developing an app. Before I go into developing an app, I want to show you on your file system what happened. Where is the project? So if you browse back to your application, and I forgot where I saved it. So if you forget where you saved the project, you can go to File and say Show in Finder, and this will open Finder, and I saved it under the movie folder. Alright. Okay, so here is your project. So in your project there is the folder, the initial folder, this one here in the project navigation. They correspond to each other, and then this initial folder contains inside it a configuration file and another folder. So if you open that, there's the configuration file and the second folder that you have there. Both the configuration file and that folder, these two represent your project. So if you want to move your project to another computer or submit it to me, you will need to compress or copy that external folder. I'm going to call it the external folder and the internal folder. Both of them have exactly the same name as your project name, but the difference between them is the external folder contains the internal plus the configuration. The internal folder contains the Swift files and the storyboard files and the assets and so on. So if you want to compress this folder to email it to yourself or to someone, you right click and say compress, and that creates a zip file, and that zip file you can then copy. You can then copy that zip file or email it or send it to anyone. So that's where your project is located. And again, the biggest mistake that I've seen people fall into is they try to copy the inside folder or the configuration file, not the outside. And if you move either one of those alone, the app Xcode will not be able to open the project. You need the outside folder fully, and that's why that's the one. That's the one that you need to compress and to zip. So having said that, we already set up the source control, and if you go to the source control menu, you will see information about the source control here. The most important piece for us is to commit. Once you made changes to the project, you'll see that M here next to the file that changed. So we made some change. I clicked on assets, so it's thought that I made changes to it, which is good because now I can commit those changes. By committing the changes, what this means is I am telling Xcode that, or the source control, that this is an independent version. You want to commit the changes often, so we'll try to commit after every iteration. Some people commit after every major change. The benefits of committing is you give the source code, the version control, more versions, allowing you to recover back to a saved version in case you messed up your work. To commit, you have to provide a message. So we'll say here initial project setup, and then we say commit one file. So that commits the file, and you no longer see the M. The other part that I want to do before leaving this is to save the project on an external repository on an external server. So now the project is managed by a source control on my local computer, which is great as long as I have the local computer. But now there are tools that represent external or cloud-based repositories. The word repository means folder. You can think of it as a folder, your project folder. So how can I let Xcode copy my project folder to an external server so that I can access it from different computers and I can share it? There are several repositories, and one of them is called GitHub, and GitHub.com is the server that you can use, but inside the University of Cincinnati we have our own installation at github.uc.edu. It's an internal installation, and that's the one we're gonna use for this course. If you are not in the university and watching this video, you can just go to github.com and create an account there, or skip this part. So for UC students, you go to github.uc.edu, sign in with your information, and that will take you to a page like this. What we will do is to create a new repository, and we're gonna give this repository a name, 17. I'm gonna call it with the semester name because I do that every semester, so it allows me to distinguish the two. For your case, just type your name, the project name, because you as an owner is added to it here. You can make the repository public or private. I'm gonna make it private. Very important, uncheck initialize the repository. The reason we don't want to initialize it because we already initialized it locally. We already have a local repository, so we do not want an external one. We want Xcode to copy our local repository to the external. So we're just setting up an external one so that Xcode can copy to it. And then say create repository. So now GitHub created the repository and we have a URL for it here. So copy that URL, double click to select and copy, command copy that URL, and go back to Xcode. And if you go to source control and go to, you don't see it on the screen here, but it's a source code, and then select the project, and you will see the selected a project. Next to it, it says master, and then go to configure the project. And when you go to configure, there's the option to go to remote. So go to remote and add a remote repository and add the address, paste the address that we copied, and then say add remote, and then done. When you attempt to commit the project or to push the project to the remote, it will ask you to type in your username and password and will copy the project to github.com. The last piece, so going back to the steps, so I finished this step. We created a new project. I finished this second step. The last is to set up a splash screen. So back to Xcode and switch to the splash screen. So the storyboard is loading in the editor area. We'll give it a few seconds to load. So here is our splash screen. As you can see from here, it looks very much like a screen on your app. I want you to pay attention to this arrow. This arrow means that this screen is the initial one. Remember, in the configuration, we pointed to this file, and within that file, the storyboard file, the arrow points to the screen. The document outliner is a list. It's like the project navigator for the content that's on the screen. One of very important one is this. There are three icons or representations here. The top one is called the view controller, and as you can see, there's a highlighted boundary in blue, and then there's the white area in the middle. So the view controller is an external area. It's actually a logical, it's an invisible controller for what's inside it, which is that area, that white area. This is which is called the view. This is the rectangular area that represents the screen. The view is what you see on your app. So the view is what you see on the app. The controller is like an envelope that contains that view, imaginary envelope that you do not see when you run the app on your phone, but it provides a connector between what you see and the logic that happens behind the scene. So this is very important. And the name view controller refers to the name of this file. See this file here, viewcontroller.swift. That file contains the logic that governs this open area. Actually, I am mistaken. That file, I forgot we are in the launch screen. That file governs the screen in the main storyboard, not the launch screen. I moved to one inspector. Notice how the inspectors changed when we are in the storyboard. Now there are 6 inspectors. The third one is called the identity inspector, which can tell you the identity of any component you're selecting. So it's pointing here to something called UI view controller, which is the library in the iOS platform that corresponds to this one. Right, back to the view and the launch screen. We need to add information about the user. Let's switch to this attribute inspector. And in the attribute inspector, you can control things such as the color. And you see here the white color. So let's change that. When I clicked on it, it opens the color wheel. You can move the color wheel to choose a background color for your splash screen. So I'm going to use this color. So now I have a splash screen with this color.